This is the Economic Club of Florida, a distinguished platform for discussion of the major national issues of the day. On today's program, Fielding Miller of CAPTRUST on why independent financial advisory firms are catching on among investors.
If you're with a brokerage firm or an asset manager, all you really have to offer are the proprietary products that your company provides. So that cannot be the best solution for anyone and everyone.
Good day and welcome to the 537th in our series of distinguished speaker programs. I'm Harvey Bennett for the Economic Club of Florida. We're going to talk about something today that goes to the heart of economics, financial investment. We're very pleased to have with us Fielding Miller, co-founder and CEO of CAPTRUST, a financial services firm based in Raleigh, North Carolina, that today is the #1 ranked independent advisory firm in the U.S. by Financial Advisor magazine. Fielding, welcome. You have a great entrepreneurial story to tell that started almost 35 years ago in 1986. How did you decide to get into the investment advisory business?
Well, Harvey, the reality is I didn't decide to go in the investment business. I was kind of forced into it. And it's a little bit of a long story, but I'll give you the short version. Out of college, I went to work for a bank. It was NCMB back then. Now it's Bank of America. And I knew I wasn't going to make a fortune in that business. And so I started investing in real estate on the side. And I was buying some rental homes. I was working nights and weekends, fixing them up, renting them out. And that was going along really well. My wife was actually the breadwinner in our family. I was making the sum total of $16,000 a year in salary, which wasn't even a lot of money back then. So that was my plan for creating wealth. And then things turned a bit. So at that time, I had 3 rental homes. My wife and I had a condo, and we're in the process of buying a house and selling the condo. My wife was pregnant with our first child. So as luck would have it, all 3 rental homes came vacant at the same time. We did close on the house in Raleigh, and the condo that we were selling, that sale fell through. So I found myself with 5 mortgages. And to make the story even, I guess, more dramatic, my wife's boss, with about a week later, is on the front page of the News and Observer in handcuffs with the FBI.
Good Lord.
So he got caught kiting funds. The business collapsed. He hadn't paid his health insurance premiums. So my pregnant wife, who was on their health plan, all of a sudden didn't have insurance. So there we were, 5 mortgages, pregnant wife, no insurance, and $16,000 a year of income. So I didn't choose to go in the investment business. I was forced into it. I had to make a better living.
Man, necessity is definitely the mother of invention, wasn't it?
It sure was.
Wow.
It was a blessing, though. You know how things have a way of working out.
Oh, and has it worked out for you? CAPTRUST is a very strong, independent financial advisory firm today. And being a financial advisory firm, it means that you largely give advice only rather than doing the actual investing that you have a stake in. And that's what I want to ask you about. Tell us why that difference is important and why that concept has caught on so successfully.
Well, just think logically here. If you're with a brokerage firm or an asset manager, all you really have to offer are the proprietary products that your company provides. So that cannot be the best solution for anyone and everyone. So I adopted an approach where I would go out and first of all, I'd get hired by a client, and then I would go out and I would select the best money managers I could find in every category, whether it was U.S. equities, municipal bonds, real estate, or whatever. And I would put those together in an asset allocation plan that made sense for that particular investor to get, from A to B, whatever their financial goals happen to be. So as this kind of quarterback of all these other money managers, I could always get the best money manager for the sector. And if they weren't performing, I would fire them and find a new one. Well, if you're a proprietary money manager, you're never going to fire yourself. So there's no objectivity there. There's a clear conflict. And so this model that we followed. This is done a lot more frequently today, but 30 years ago plus, this didn't even exist. So I was early to that idea and frankly failed for the first 2 or 3 years because wealth management clients weren't interested in it because it was the 90s and the market was going up 20% a year for almost for the whole decade. I think it averaged 18%. So ultimately, where we got traction was with fiduciaries of retirement plans. They understood the value of having an objective fiduciary advisor to go out and build the right plan with the right managers to help them get to their goals.
Gotcha. Now, although the bulk of your business is providing investment advice to retirement and pension funds, you also have a burgeoning endowment and foundation side of your business that has some notable Florida client organizations, right?
Let's see. Down in Florida, we have the Barbara Bush Foundation, Associated Industries, Farm Share down in Miami. And there's a couple of dozen different endowments and foundations that we represent. And interestingly, Harvey, there's a lot of movement going on in that space. Endowments and foundations, as you know, they have a responsibility or a goal to pay out somewhere between 4 and 6% of the corpus of their funds to the beneficiaries of those funds. And those beneficiaries depend on that income stream to run their particular organizations. And being able to pay out, let's say 5%, you've got to earn considerably more than that. Let's say 7%, because you have expenses. You also have inflation you got to deal with. So let's just say to get a 7% return, that's not that easy to do in a market where bonds are yielding virtually nothing. So if you had a 60% equity portfolio and 40% bonds, that puts a lot of pressure on the equity side of the portfolio, and that becomes somewhat unrealistic. So you have to be creative and come up with other strategies and other asset classes. And as a result, there's a lot of endowments and foundations that have worked well with a formula like that, but now it's not sustainable. So lots of movement, lots of opportunity, and it's a very fast growing business segment for us.
Well, we certainly look forward to hearing more about that and the different ways that you have found to not only survive, but to grow into the company that you've become today. Fielding Miller, thank you. We look forward to hearing your formal remarks and learning more about how and why independent financial advisory firms such as CAPTRUST are really taking off, and their impact, of course, on investment in our economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Harvey.
Now, here's Barney Bishop, our secretary of the Economic Club of Florida and president and CEO of Barney Bishop Consulting, with our formal introduction.
It is my pleasure today to introduce Fielding Miller, the co-founder and chief executive officer of CAPTRUST, which is based in Raleigh, North Carolina, and is ranked as the #1 independent financial advisory firm in the United States by Financial Advisor magazine. Fielding is a native North Carolinian who attended East Carolina University and graduated with a bachelor's degree in business administration, and where he also met his future wife, Kim, also a business major. Earlier this year, CAPTRUST, under Fielding's leadership, which has successfully consummated a remarkable 45 acquisitions over the last 14 years, completed a transaction with an institutional investor that valued the firm at $1.25 billion, and Fielding is expecting to top $2 billion next year. An amazing accomplishment in a relatively short period of time since the company's founding. CAPTRUST has 3 primary business lines, which are retirement plan consulting, endowments and foundations, and wealth management. They have 800 employees and 42 offices spread coast to coast, and nationally they have garnered $425 billion in client assets. Some of their ever-expanding list of national clients include famed Tiffany's, the Brookings Institute, Coca-Cola Bottling, Bain Capital, Alabama Power, Duke Health, Princeton University, and even Regeneron, which is the pharmaceutical company that provided the specialized drug treatment for President Donald Trump when he came down with the COVID, to name just a few. Under Fielding's aggressive growth plan, CAPTRUST has enjoyed 22% in revenue growth for over 23 years. In Florida, they have 3 offices, one in Miami, Tampa, and Orlando, with 178 client assets totaling $23 billion. A few of their Florida clients are the New York Yankees, Outback Steakhouse, Associated Industries of Florida, the Florida Sheriff's Youth Ranches, Baycare Health, Tampa General Hospital, along with a cadre of higher education institutions, including the University of Miami, Nova Southeastern University, the University of Central Florida, and Embry-Riddle University. Being a very successful entrepreneur and building a company from scratch is an amazing success story in itself. But one of the principles that Fielding lives by is giving back to his community. Just yesterday, they announced that the CAPTRUST Community Foundation, founded in 2007, has donated $450,000 this year to 45 charities in cities where they have offices around the country in honor of Giving Tuesday. Over the past 13 years, the CAPTRUST Community Foundation has awarded more than $2.5 million in grants to charitable organizations, which is a tribute to Fielding's vision. And he's encouraged his employees to contribute where they can help others in need, especially children and families that need food, shelter, and other basic needs. Despite the rough and tumble of the national economy due to COVID-19, Fielding announced earlier this year that there would be no layoffs or furloughs at CAPTRUST. And true to his word, there have been none. Consequently, just this year, the employees at CAPTRUST added another $4.8 million to the foundation's endowment. And importantly, 100% of the donations made to the foundation goes to charitable grants, 100%. What a great story about a company that manages wealth and yet is committed to the cause of helping others by enriching the lives of children and families and communities that they serve. Fielding and his wife are the benefactors of the Miller School of Entrepreneurship at Eastern Carolina, which is a fitting tribute for a man whose first job after college was working as a bank branch manager for Bank of America, then as a salesman for 2 years, and by 2006, he had already co-founded CAPTRUST. The Miller School has already been recognized nationally by Princeton Review as the 47th best undergraduate entrepreneurship program in the country. His peers have recognized him with the 2020 CEO Year by Wealth Management Magazine. Last year, he was selected Investment News with the Innovator and Icons Award. He was an Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Southeast finalist in 2013. And in 2012, he was presented with a Lifetime Achievement Award by Plan Advisor magazine. Fielding's comments upon announcing he and his wife's gift to Eastern Carolina to create the School of Entrepreneurship says it all. Modern business requires innovation to be successful. It doesn't matter which industry or whether it is a startup or large established firm. Competition demands that business constantly seek new and better ways to operate and serve their communities. That's why it's so critical to instill essential entrepreneurship abilities among our future leaders. Let's welcome Fielding Miller, who will speak to us today on the topic of the emerging financial industry giant, independent financial advisory firms.
Well, thank you, Michael and Barney, for a nice introduction and giving me the opportunity to address such a fine group. Barney, just for the record, it's not Eastern Carolina. Those are fighting words, it's East Carolina. So please remember that. No, but thank you. But in full disclosure, I think you need to know that when Bo Perry called me a couple of months ago about this engagement, we had a call, and I said emphatically, Bo, there's no way I can do this. We're up to our necks in acquisitions and integrations. I just don't have the time. So he waited a few days. He called back again. He asked me to reconsider, and I said, look, Bo, I can't do it. Sorry. I did offer up our CIO, Kevin Berry. It's the Economic Club. He said, these guys hear all about that sort of stuff. And so just tell them some of your stories. It'll be great. Besides, it's only 30 minutes. Surely you can spare 30 minutes for your old pal, Bo. I said, sorry, Bo, I just can't do it. He said, come on, man. I said, I tell you what, I'll give you my mountain house in Blowing Rock for a week this coming summer. I said, well, how about the week of 4th of July? He paused. He said, okay. I said, deal. Let's do it. So here we are. I'm looking forward to next summer. And by the way, being speaker number 537 doesn't bother me. I understand you guys had to go through a lot of others, but I know you're digging a little deep, but I'm really proud to be here. Per the introduction, I do want to share some things today about the investment advisory business and how registered investment advisors are different than other firms and why we're growing so fast. A little bit about our journey at CAPTRUST. So I don't want to take too long, but I'll just give you a few thoughts. I'll start with a bit of an industry backdrop. Excuse me. The industry for financial advice is growing rapidly. At the same time, the supply of advisors is shrinking. We have more advisors over 65 years old than under 35 years old, at a ratio of almost 2 to 1. We have 10,000 baby boomers turning 65 every day, and they're underfunded for retirement. You have pensions going away. You have Social Security underfunded. And all of these soon-to-be retirees have to be self-reliant, and the vast majority don't understand or even want to understand how to invest, and they need help. Right now, there are $26 trillion of assets moving from the baby boomers that are retiring and moving on to millennials, and that's over the next 10 to 20 years. And the millennials will get these assets at some point in 10 years out. I think it's supposed to grow to about 63 million, and 77% of these millennials don't even have an advisor. So net all that out, and there is a gold rush to capture those assets. And a lot of firms are going after it, just as we are. When you hear the term independent advisory firms, just know what I'm talking about. These are registered investment advisory firms, or we call them RIAs. We're regulated by the SEC. We're heavily regulated by the SEC. And we differ from traditional investment firms because we serve as fiduciaries. And, we compete with the typical brokerage firms, like think of the Wall Street banks and brokerage firms: Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch, Goldman Sachs, Wells Fargo, and so on. But these are brokers. And the RIAs, the industry that I'm in, we act as fiduciaries. So it's really different. We have to meet a much higher standard of care. In fact, we're contractually liable to put our client interests first. We have the ongoing responsibility for overseeing their investments as long as they're with us. All of this seems super logical. It's not, you probably wonder, why am I even telling you this? But that's what most people think. But excuse me, computer's messing up here. As most people think, that's the way advisors would operate, but it's not even true. When you think about the industry that we all grew up in, or most of you are aware of, it's been particularly dominated by the broker-dealers, kind of the Wall Street banks and broker-dealers. Their standard of care with clients is much less stringent. A broker only has to verify that the investment recommendation they're making is appropriate on the day that they make it. Okay? After that, they have no responsibility for whatever they sold this particular client. So that's a huge difference. You've got one group that is fiduciarily liable for their recommendations and always has to put their client interests first. And you have another group, the ones that have dominated our industry, the financial advisory industry, forever. It doesn't. They just have to, basically, they can sell products, and the next day it doesn't really matter. A great example was back when I believe it was 2009, when Goldman chairman and CEO Lloyd Blankfein, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, was interviewed about what Goldman Sachs was doing in the I guess the Great Recession. And like a lot of firms, Goldman was packaging up a lot of these mortgages and into products they could turn around and sell to their clients as safe fixed income investments. But simultaneously, they shorted the same securities because they knew the deal. They knew that these securities were weaker than they appeared. Think about that. So you have clients, you create a product that you know is not going to work or shouldn't work, and then you short it simultaneously. Now, This is perfectly legal. It's legal. It's corrupt, but it's legal. And but it tells, I think, and it kind of encapsulates the story of what's going on Wall Street and why there's a growing demand for the RIA industry. So when I started in the business, the fee-based fiduciary model didn't really exist. I mean, it wasn't even 0.5% of revenue of financial advisory industry. And just this year, the wealth management assets at the major brokerage firms compared to the RIA industry is losing. The RIA industry is growing at 3 times the rate and accelerating. And RIAs have just surpassed the assets of all these major brokerage firms. To me, that's a staggering statement. Because as I said, when I started, this was a unknown type of industry. So you might ask, why is this happening? Well, the fiduciary model is best, I think, because it's on the right side of history. You have clients that are frustrated with the conflicted models. And eventually clients will vote with their feet and gravity will take over, and RIAs are gaining assets by the day and accelerating. I think it's going to be here for a good long while. So I just wanted to get you an indication of why this industry is emerging. It's been a cottage industry of small businesses, entrepreneurial businesses, about 15,000 around the country, but it's growing really quickly. So I want to talk a little bit about CAPTRUST and our vision and where we've been and where we're going. And I'll try to avoid the temptation of revisionist history. However, just to be fully candid, my vision for the business was only to make a living, 100%. So it's not like I had some great vision when I was in my 20s. It was get a job, make a living, and then go from there. As it relates to our story, entrepreneurs can drone on forever. I'll try not to do that today. Instead, I thought I would share a few examples that represent, the keys to how we've succeeded over the years. Just a little bit on me. I started in the brokerage business at age 25. And because I came from the brokerage business, that's just one of the reasons I'm so passionate about competing with the brokerage business. So on the inside of a brokerage firm, you will see the conflicts. Frankly, they're everywhere. And at least when I was there, it was more of a buyer beware approach to the business. Legal, but I don't know if that's the right way to think about it. As a point of fact, 75% of the revenues at brokerage firms at that time were generated in the last week of the month. Just think about that for a second. The success that brokers were achieving was all about commissions earned and really no recognition on client performance. Obviously, that's changed over the years, but that's the industry in which I came. So I had a bit of an epiphany. This goes back 30 years ago. And the idea was there's this new model coming out, which is where you charge fees instead of commissions. You see this a lot today, but 30 years ago, it really didn't exist. And we just felt like that would put us on the right side of the table with the clients. And there's never this kind of elephant in the room about, are you advising me to do this because it's better for you or better for me? So it was the right idea, but the timing was horrible. It was so early. You remember back to the 90s, stock market was ripping up 20% a year for the whole decade. So when you're trying to talk to a wealth management client about fiduciary responsibility and all that, and the way we did business, nobody really cared. They did end up carrying on the retirement plan and endowment and foundation business line or segments, and that's eventually where we got traction and off we went. Today we have all 3 business lines, and we feel like we're successful in all of those, but that's kind of how the whole thing got started. So I thought I would share 3 examples of I guess we'll call it our success formula. And the first, and I'll try to give a little bit of a story for each of them. The first one is that we've been laser focused on creating and sustaining a really strong culture. Now, how many books have come out in the last years about how important company culture is, and somewhat of a cliche in corporate America. But for us, for this entire time, it has been the bedrock of our business. and I would say the leading driver of our success. And the idea is if you can create a unified workforce that is aligned with the same values and vision and economic incentives, they're going to do great. So I was fortunate enough to learn this lesson at a very early age. The same brokerage firm I was with, it was early on in, when I just got there, it was in a bit of trouble. And frankly, it looked like it was going to go out of business. And a gentleman by the name of Jim Morgan, who actually used to work there as a chief investment officer, left and then came back to be the CEO. And this is a firm that was in deep, deep trouble. And he came back and he turned that company around 100% by changing the culture. And so I got to see this. I was probably 28 years old, maybe 29 at the time, and I got to watch this. And it was fascinating to see how this man, Jim Morgan, came in and was able to turn the company around, not by financial engineering, but just by focusing on people and getting them energized and focused. Excuse me. Later on, he did the same thing at a company called Krispy Kreme, which a lot of you may know, but they got in trouble and he was on the board. They asked him to come in as CEO and he turned that company around. So I got a couple of really great examples watching him. And, we tried to adapt some of those ideas and just basically the philosophy of all that. And a couple things that worked really well. The first one is having a consistent and clear mission. Now, a lot of you, like me, a while back, think mission statements are the kind of things you put in a frame, you put on the wall, it gathers dust, and nobody ever looks at it again. But for me, I went to a leadership training program called Bell Leadership over here in Chapel Hill, which I would recommend it to anybody out there that's looking for maybe some leadership development. And Dr. Bell said, okay, you're never going to build. First of all, we talked about missions. I was kind of tuned out. I didn't think it was all that interesting. And he said, there's a lot of companies that don't have a mission, but there's never been a great company that doesn't have a mission. And that got my attention. So I'm kind of leaning in. And he says, furthermore, the worst thing that can happen to a company that doesn't have a mission is to run into a company that's on a mission. Well, he had my attention. And so we came back, we developed this mission, and it guides us to this day. It's all about enriching the lives of our clients, our colleagues, and communities. And it goes on a little bit for another sentence. The point is that we put them on equal stead. If we have great clients, but we don't take care of our colleagues, you're going to lose the clients, right? So you got to take care of both. And if you get the first two right, and you don't focus on your communities, and you're 80 whatever years old, and you're looking back on your career, that's probably all that's going to matter. So we took a lot of take a lot of pride in our mission, and we work on it every day, and very proud of it. So for those of you that don't have a mission statement out there, I'd be glad to share with you more about that someday if you want to give me a call. The other component that has been really helpful in our alignment is a broad employee equity plan. CAPTRUST, up until just recently, has been 100% employee owned. The stock is widely dispersed. It is awarded, not purchased. And a lot of people say, why do you do that? And it's really easy. If you've got a bunch of people walking the halls thinking like owners, you're going to be successful. Everybody's aligned, same mentality, shared purpose, and the economic interest are aligned. One quick example is we hired a lady. This goes back a ways, and she came in at the kind of the bottom of the org chart, and she was an assistant to an assistant. And she's worked her way up the ladder over the years, and she became a shareholder, and she's done really well. So our new chief investment officer was out in Dallas, Texas, and his last meeting got canceled. So he calls this woman who handles his travel and said, can you book me on an earlier flight? And of course, she clickety-click. She goes in and she tries to figure out what that would look like. And she says, well, to change this flight, it's going to be an extra $600. She says, enjoy your dinner, and hung up on him. Bang. I'm thinking that is a administrative employee that just told the CIO to tough it. We're not spending that kind of money at CAPTRUST. She's an owner. I thought that was pretty darn cool. So just going to the next point beyond culture, I would say the second thing that helped us be successful is what we call, I guess you certainly understand this, just delayed gratification. And what I mean by that is we're very committed to reinvesting in our business. And instead of pocketing our profits every year, to, paying out in distributions or dividends, we've reinvested 50% of those profits every year for a long, long time. And so that gave us a lot of money to reinvest back in the business and to make us bigger, stronger, faster, better. And it has worked beautifully. And, you know, if you take the other approach, which frankly our industry tends to do, and you're paying out all the profits and you want to convert to a more growth-oriented mindset, it's hard to get that genie back in the bottle. So I want to share one quick example with you that I think is interesting. Some of you may have heard of this, but I think I love to hear about it all the time. So I'm sure you all have heard of a company called Nokia, actually. Down south, it's Nokia. Nokia, who hasn't heard of Nokia? But you probably don't know this. Back in the 1990s, Nokia dominated the handset phone market. And I'm sure a lot of the folks on this call had a Nokia phone. They had 90% of the market's global profits. 90%. From every vantage point, they were poised to dominate for years to come. They were the undisputed leader in one of the biggest growth markets the world has ever seen. They were sitting on top of the largest cash pile of any company in the history of corporate America. Or this actually wasn't an American company, the history of the markets. They were leading in the technology race to develop the next generation smartphones, and they had the first small touchscreen technology. They were the global leader in selling tiny cameras, and they had the technology to distribute streaming music, and were one of the first to offer free email on its phones. So think about that. That's a dominant position. And yet they failed to lead the market in developing the next generation of phones, despite calls from its engineers to do just that. But instead of thinking like a company that's on the move, insurgent, trying to grow and investing in the future, they paid out massive dividends and used the rest of their cash to buy back their own stock. Sounds pretty familiar with a lot of companies in the S&P today. So you know the rest of the story. Within a few short years, Apple, Samsung, and later Google had seized the smartphone market, and Nokia, once the model for innovation, insurgent type thinking was in steep decline. So the lesson here is clear. You know, Nokia, they lost their way because they stopped investing, they stopped innovating, and being aggressive, and it cost them everything. So we learned a really good lesson about that. That's why we were investing. It's one of the reasons. I guess that's a validation of our philosophy to reinvest aggressively. And then the last example, which is more recent, is based on a book called Firms of Endearment. Firms of Endearment. So when I first got in this industry, way back in 1986, it was common for investors to embrace what is known as the Friedman Doctrine. Friedman Doctrine. So this is a business ethics theory that was advanced by the economist, a lot of you would know, the Florida Economic Summit, I would guess, Dr. Milton Friedman. This goes all the way back to 1970. And he championed a version of capitalism based on the premise that the only social responsibility of a business is to increase its profits. This means that companies have no responsibility to the public, its employees, or society in general. Its only responsibility is to its shareholders. And I'm going to refer to these companies as traditional capitalist companies. So just recently, I was listening to a lecture. I'm in this Vistage program. It's kind of like YPO, if you will. And this lecture was by Dr. Gustavo Grodnitsky. And he had a completely different take on how to best run a profitable business. And he shared an analysis that compared the performance of companies that embraced this kind of shareholder-centric philosophy to the results of companies that embrace what he calls a a stakeholder-centric strategy. So when you think about, it's obvious who shareholders are, but when you think about stakeholders, you're adding employees, you're adding clients, you're adding vendors, the community, and so on. It's a much larger mission than just returns for shareholders. And it was super interesting to me because he compared two popular business books. One of my all-time favorites, Good to Great, I'm sure many of you have read it, by Jim Collins. There's no doubt Jim Collins has the best business metaphors ever. I'm sure you know the flywheel, the hedgehog, the doom loop, and more. So this was the first book, and he's comparing these. And then the second one was this Firms of Endearment, which was written by David Wolf, Raj Sisodia, and Jagdish Sheath. Tough names to remember or pronunciate. So if you remember, Good to Great touted the success of companies that, if you remember, good is the enemy of great. And it was talking about Wells Fargo, it was talking about Circuit City, and talking about Philip Morris, and there was, maybe another couple dozen of those companies. Well, as you know, that it didn't end up so well for those companies. And the Firms of Endearment, the Firms of Endearment companies built the case around companies like REI or Toyota or UPS. And so these companies are very different and have had very different outcomes. And so I thought what was super interesting is he compared the shareholder returns of each type of business, stakeholder business and the traditional capitalist shareholder focused business. And he had analysis that showed that the returns have been substantially better for the stakeholder focused companies. Now, the only exception to this is in recessions where actually the shareholder companies focus more on the short term, and they're public, they're slashing costs, they're laying off employees, cutting benefits, squeezing vendors, all in an effort to keep their stock prices steady during this difficult times. The stakeholder businesses focused on just staying the course. They took care of their employees, they took care of their clients, they kept investing for the future, and they were very consistent at communicating what was going on. And whether it be good or bad news, they communicate in a regular and kind of transparent, honest way. So what happens is while these companies do better over the long term, when the markets go down, they do worse than the shareholder companies because they're not cutting costs, right? But when the markets come back, it's a huge advantage because they still have all their employees and they've been aggressively investing in the business where the other companies are slow to get back to where they were. So net, this whole idea of stakeholders versus shareholders is, to me, it's super interesting. Net, profit itself is not a cause; it's an outcome. So the paradox is, if you focus just on profits, you're going to get less profits. If you focus on culture and stakeholders, you're going to get more profits. So just recently, glad to read that there was, corporate America is starting to wake up to this direction. And in August of this year, a group of last year, a group of 181 CEOs from U.S. corporations came together to issue a formal statement that dismissed the notion that corporations should only serve their shareholders and maximize profits. So rather, they should be focused on investing in their employees, delivering value to their customers, dealing ethically with suppliers, and supporting the communities in which they have businesses and where they reside. So I believe this trend is here to stay, similar to the fiduciary model of RIAs, being a stakeholder firm, really putting your clients' interests ahead of yourselves, taking care of employees. For us, culture and shared equity, huge drivers of success. And if you put yourselves, if you think about your business this way, you're just going to be on the right side of history, just like I believe that RIAs are on the right side of history. So things are going to be good. So I'll wrap it up here. I hope I didn't take too long, but I want to thank you for the opportunity, and I want to wish everyone well down in Florida. I hope the the tourism industry comes back and other things. And I'm sure I was thinking, goes back a month. I was thinking about the election, and when I saw the returns for Florida, where it was a convincing win for President Trump. I'm not making a political statement here, but I thought that was good because there wasn't going to be, you're looking at Georgia and saying, I'm so glad this is not us again. So the decisive win down there probably gave you all a sigh of relief, no matter who you voted for. So thank you, and those are my comments for today.
Thank you for your comments, and I'll remember that about ECU in the future. So a couple of questions. Until recently, you had indicated that y'all have been 100% employee owned. What changed to make you make that decision?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, Barney, we've grown the business through reinvesting profits. It's always been employee owned for 23 years, and we did take on a little bank debt, but I'm not a big fan of leveraging up this business. I don't think it really should in this industry, and but we got to the point to where the business started growing faster and faster. We just didn't have enough capital. I didn't really want to go and take on more debt. I wanted to bring in some equity, but I didn't really like the private equity world for all the reasons. I'm sure there's some private equity guys there. Sorry, but spinning out of the business every 3 to 5 years is super disruptive. But when we did our search, we made it clear that we would be a minimum of a 7-year hold with no path to majority. So it's be a minority investment. So we ended up with a firm called GTCR out of Chicago. They've been fantastic. Not only did they bring us a great valuation and capital, but they're a great strategic partner. They've helped us in many ways already. So that's where the valuation came up that you mentioned earlier. We didn't really know what the business was worth. We were pleasantly surprised that we eclipsed $1 billion. For a C student from East Carolina University, I feel pretty good about that.
Yes, sir. Great. What's the difference between an investment manager and an investment consultant?
Great question. And RIAs also include asset managers, investment managers. But the biggest difference is that an investment manager manages money a certain way. It's a proprietary strategy. That's what they do. They've got eyes down. That's just how they operate. An advisor or consultant has a different perspective. They can go out, they sit down with the client and say, what are you trying to accomplish? Okay, if we're going to get there, we need to divide your portfolio up into these slices. Okay, so we're going to go out and get the best managers we can find for each one. So if it's international equities or municipal bonds or you name it, we do a search and we go out and find the best of those managers. So we're not representing managers, we're representing the client, and the asset managers are representing themselves.
And it doesn't necessarily cost more to have you because you have the ability as a consultant to negotiate with the managers. So it's not necessarily an extra cost. Is that true?
I can't say that it's 100% true, but for the most part it is. We can always find ways to save money. We have a lot of assets that we can negotiate better rates. That's been one of the biggest advantages of our growth and scale. But yeah, I mean, if we charge more than what we can save, if we can't create incremental value above that, then we wouldn't be in business.
Yes, sir. Great. Another question: what percentage of your business is institutional, and what percentage is retail?
I don't think I talked about this, but our traction. So when we started down this path of being fiduciaries, we failed miserably. Right? Nobody cared, as I mentioned earlier. So where we did get traction was in the retirement, endowment, and foundation industries. So back in 2006, when we decided to go national, we grew the business from the institutional side. That's what we focused on. And it was about 70% of our revenues. And wealth was 30%. The interesting thing is we're spending 100% of our time on the institutional business growing it, but wealth remained at 30%. So that's pretty interesting to me. A lot of our wealth management business comes from corporate relationships. But recently, as we have pivoted to adding more focus on wealth management, primarily through acquisition, we buy a business, a retirement plan or endowment foundation consulting business in Minneapolis, That gives us a beachhead, and then we buy a wealth management firm up there, put them together. So that's the strategy. And just maybe next year, wealth management revenue will equal or exceed institutional revenue.
Okay, great. Another question we have is, what do you think is the most important skill that an entrepreneur needs to be a success?
Grit. It's just grit, because you're gonna. To me, the best success that I've had in my career is failure. What did I do with failure? Because you learn so much. You learn about your team, you learn about yourself, you learn about the market, you get stronger. You hope to, but you hope to survive the failure, right? And when I look back on the things that we did that accelerated our business over the many years was in response to failure.
It's a good lesson for all of us to understand.
College kids don't understand that, I can assure you.
No,
I'm trying it.
When you initiate an acquisition, what are the qualities or metrics that you look at to make a decision whether you want to go forward or not?
Yeah. So you would think that everybody in our industry was pretty similar. They're not. So when we're buying these firms, we call them snowflakes, right? From 10 feet, they look the same. You get closer, they're a little different. So we have a profile that it's like probably 30 different things that are, that we're looking for a firm to fit in. There's probably 6 of them that are non-negotiable. Number 1, and it could be 1 through 6, is cultural match. Do these people have the same, kind of values, worldview, aspirations as the rest of us? Are they coming here? Are they buying in or selling out? We don't want to buy a firm and the entrepreneur go away. We want it to accelerate their growth in the future. So when you buy a business, they're kind of selling their past, and we're buying the future. Right? So they've got to be a grower. They've got to have some gas in the tank. They've got to be a good cultural match. They have to have a clean compliance record, all the normal stuff. But there's a lot of, there's been a lot written about. I think the majority of M&A fails, merger and acquisitions, and it's almost 80% culturally related. So that's a big deal, especially in a kind of professional services industry.
Okay. Next question is, what's your track record? Do you find that if every 10 acquisitions that you go after, you get 5 of them, or do you get 8 of them, or do you get 2 of them?
So good question. We're no different than any other business looking to acquire the firms. There's a funnel, right? There's a prospect funnel, and you've got so many at the top, and it works its way down. But by the time it comes to me or the senior executives, they're on site or whatever, they're pretty far down the funnel, right? In other words, our sourcing people have been kicking them out for all the reasons I was just mentioning. So typically, if we get them here and down that funnel, it's a pretty high conversion rate. I would say 70%.
Wow. Very good.
And this is interesting. So we're going to do 10 transactions this year, which is by far a record.
Wow.
And 2 of the deals were deals that firms that turned us down 3 years ago. Right, and they came back around. So, they saw us. They said, "Okay, not now." They looked around. They said, "Wait a minute, that firm back in Raleigh seemed to make more sense." So that's how some of that accelerates over time.
On pre-COVID, did you make an attempt to go to all your different offices around the country? Was that important to you to have a person-to-person, peer-to-peer meetings with your staff? You have 800 employees. That's a lot of folks now.
Yeah, it is. I don't know them all. I can't believe it. I used to know all their kids and birthdays and all that, but I don't. So, gosh, I wish I had time to tell you the Chick-fil-A story and how they go about that. But it's if you get the right people and they're out in the regions with they're reinforcing the culture. They're doing business the right way. You don't have to go to every office that often. We do have what we call a milk route, where I'll go and see, every third firm or third office in the next, our president and so on will do it. So they're getting constant attention, and we fly them in quite a bit. that tends to focus on the top producers and executives of those businesses. We've been working super hard during COVID to do the opposite. As an example, I announced to our employees March 16th, well, a little bit before that everybody's got a job, everybody's got a seat, go back to work. And then I followed up with Zoom, or we call them Teams calls, Microsoft Team calls. I said, I want to meet every employee. Our newest employees have to be here less than a year, and they've got to be on the lowest part of the compensation scale because they're going to be the most afraid. They're the ones that are thinking we're going to get canned here. That was a really good exercise. I don't know how it was for them. It was awesome for me. Awesome. And they really liked the fact that we said, look, you got a job, relax. Let's get to work. Let's be aggressive. If we don't believe the stock market's going to come back or the economy is going to come back, why are we in the darn business to start with? Let's get aggressive. And they liked that. Even though they can't do a lot about it, they at least know the passion and energy we have around leaning into the adversity as opposed to recoiling.
Fielding, you've become such a successful businessman, but in reading a background and putting together my introductory comments about you, I read an interesting story about how you got started. So many of us think that entrepreneurs or successful business people are because they come from money and wealth to begin with, and I'm not suggesting that you didn't, but you put yourself in a position with a wife and some condos that you bought in your wife's pregnancy. Would you share that story a little bit with our members? It would really be instructive and illustrative of your career.
Yeah, so I like to say this is a 2-beer story. I'll do it in a sip. So long story short, I was working for the bank as a branch manager. I wanted to create wealth. I knew I wasn't going to do it there. So I started buying. I was down in Fayetteville, North Carolina, where they had a bunch of, the military town. And I was buying up houses and renting them out. And so in a military town, you have a lot of VA loans where to buy a house, you don't have to go through a closing. It's almost like a car title. They can sign it over and you just take over the mortgage. So I'd done about 3 of these houses. I was making a grand total of $16,000 of income at the bank. At these 3 houses, I was commuting to Fayetteville. My wife, who was the breadwinner, was in Cary, where we lived. She got pregnant. We're selling this condo. We're buying a house in North Raleigh. Just the most bizarre thing. All 3 of the rental houses in Fayetteville came vacant. The condo sale that we had in Cary fell through, but we closed on the house in North Raleigh. Okay, so we had 5 mortgages. To make matters more interesting, shortly thereafter, the front page of the News and Observer in Raleigh has her boss in handcuffs walking off with the FBI. I'm not kidding. This happened. Pregnant wife on their insurance. So 5 mortgages, wife unemployed, pregnant with no insurance. And that's when I went from the bank to the brokerage business. So failure has a way of, turning the tides. And I went from not sleeping, basically I was almost bankrupt at 25. Literally, I don't think I slept 2 hours a night for a month. But it was it's one of those things that a lot of people in this call have gone through or know people have gone through, and not what happens to you, it's what you do about it, right? And I think we responded pretty well.
And I guess
there's a lot more to that story, but that's kind of the synopsis.
Sure, but I guess that goes back when I asked you about what's the key personality skill for an entrepreneur, and you said grit. That obviously
it's grit.
Persistence. Due diligence.
It's the ability to get through failure.
Yeah.
Get up, dust yourself off and keep fighting. It's our industry has a 90% washout rate. And some people would say maybe it's 95. And then you get you make it in the industry, and those that rise to the top, is a small fraction of those. So it's a great business if you're successful. It's a horrible business if you're not. It's painful. It's a lot of failure, a lot of rejection. And fortunately, I just, frankly, it's God's grace, I guess, but I love this industry from the day I started. I was with the brokerage firm. I told you what I didn't like about that, but I still like the industry. And then, that drove me to start CAPTRUST.
That's great. So I guess the last question that I wanted to ask is, obviously North Carolina is your home state. So is that the state where you have the most amount of assets and people in? Where does Florida rank? Are we near the top of the list for y'all, or what's the biggest?
Yeah, it's a fantastic office. Obviously Bo's down there. I've known Bo for forever. And Eric Bailey, who's the managing principal down there. They've got a fabulous business of endowments and foundations, retirement and wealth management. The $20 to $30 billion they oversee is very substantial, and it's got to be, if not the top non-Raleigh office, is top 2 or 3.
Thank you, Fielding, and thanks, Barney Bishop, for asking the questions. And Fielding, typically I would thank you on behalf of the board and our members, but after the story about Bo Perry, and I checked to make sure he's on the line, I think we owe a debt of gratitude to Bo Perry for letting you use his house in Blowing Rock for the summer. Just let me know, and I'll just give me the address, and I'll come visit. Again,
I'm sure he's going to try to renegotiate that.
You've been listening to Fielding Miller, co-founder and CEO of CAPTRUST, speaking before the Economic Club of Florida on December 2nd, 2020. For more information on CAPTRUST, visit captrust.com. The Economic Club of Florida promotes interest and enlightenment on important economic, political, and social issues of the day. To learn more, including how to become a member, visit our website at economic-club.com.